30 years ago, America's high schools were considered the best in the world, placing in first on a global scale. Now, America places 36. Students entering high school today experience a drastic drop in self-esteem, but a gradual increase once they have graduated. As fellow high school students, we are curious as to what causes both the drop in academic quality and in self-esteem. More specifically, we focus on grades, being the overall summary of academic achievement. Thus, we introduce the question, to what extent is there a correlation between grades and self-esteem in the American public high school education system? While there are outside forces that impact student self-esteem, there is a stronger correlation between self-esteem and the grades in the American public high school education system.
Let's take a look at a survey we gave to 51 anonymous North Oldham High School students. When asked how would you rate your self-esteem, with 1 being low and 10 being high, the results were definitely not similar to a normal bell curve. 58% of students rated their self-esteem as 5 or lower, with the most common response being a 1. When asked how much do you think grades affect your self-esteem, over 96% of students rated the correlation as 5 or higher. 21% of students rated the correlation as 10. 90% of students rated their self-esteem if they received an A as 5 or higher, with the most votes as a 10. It is obviously shown that as the grade letter decreases, the average self-esteem level decreases as well. Finally, when receiving an F, 96% of students rated their self-esteem as 5 or lower, with 67% rating it a 1. Looking at this data, it is not hard to see that there is an obviously strong and positive correlation between grades and self-esteem.
In order to understand how people really felt about how grades affect a student's self-esteem, we decided to go around our school and interview a few teachers and students. How are grades affecting students?
Well, they positively affect students in a way that it demonstrates to them either specific areas of growth or success that they've had, or content mastery that they've been able to acquire. They allow students to have greater access to college admissions, gives them opportunities to gain college scholarships. It can build self-esteem as well, depending on the class and how hard they had to work to get to that place. I think grades can be overemphasized. They tend to be overemphasized at home. Parents who tend to not have a great understanding of what's happening in a particular class maybe put too much pressure on a student to get to a certain number. Why don't you have an A? Why don't you have a B? And they really don't understand what the student is doing to get to that place. Now, there are some parents that may say, well, my student's definitely not a C student, and that may be correct, but without having a better understanding of how that grade is calculated, sometimes it puts a lot of pressure on students.
If you're taking really hard classes, it can affect your stress level physically. I mean, you can have physical symptoms from it, as well as if you're struggling in a class, that can affect you physically as well. Some people can have, nausea and vomiting from it, as well as other physical symptoms.
Stress can affect your body in many ways. It can cause rashes, eczema, psoriasis, heart disease, hypertension, aches, back pain, nervous tics, ulcers, cotton mouth, insomnia, headaches, nausea, ulcers, irritable colon, recurrent infections, and impotence.
How do grades affect your self-esteem?
Kind of makes me in the back of my mind, you sort of tell yourself you're like a failure if you get like a F on something, or even like a C. You're just like, great, look at me. You just doesn't make you feel good.
It makes me feel really insecure because I'm very future oriented, so when I start getting really stressed, I start thinking oh my god, can I do this? Can I get into a good college? And I just start spiraling out of control.
High school students in 2014 have the same anxiety levels as insane asylum patients in the 1950s. In a survey done by the American Psychology Association, they noted that high school students said they had stress levels far higher than what they believed is healthy, and their reported stress levels even higher during the school year. They stated also that teens say stress is having an impact on their performance on their home, work, and school.
In what way do grades and self-esteem correlate?
They correlate positively, strong, probably linearly. There's, the higher your grade, the better your self-esteem. You see that evidenced by the classes or the fields of study that students go into. Sometimes it's unfortunate when they struggle in a field and their grades sort of reflect that. They tend to shy away from that field instead of just persevering. And when they find they have a knack for something, maybe it's just they're more mature in that way, or they're more developed in that way than their peers. They feel like they're good at it, and that, of course, builds their self-esteem. And all of a sudden, they can kind of steer themselves toward a field that where they feel they can be successful. So, definitely, there's a strong correlation between the two.
Well, I think that they can correlate, and it depends really on the student themselves. So some students, I think, probably their self-esteem would be affected more. Some students may even learn something like learned helplessness, where if they've been unsuccessful before, then they're less willing to try because of that grade that had been associated with something, especially if there's pressure from peers or parents or educators to focus on the grade. So that at times can be challenging, and I think that can harm some students' self-esteem. Some students, it may not affect them at all, so it kind of depends on the student, since each student is individual.
I think there's a correlation between grades and self-esteem. I think the greater correlation should be based on what that grade means to that individual student. It should be the effort, the intentionality, the hard work that goes into it. If you have a student that really struggles and they take, say, an AP class or an honors class, and that class is right at the edge of their skill level and they're able to find success, whatever defines success, then that's going to build self-esteem, regardless of what the number is. They could have a 72% in a class and be really proud of that. Another student could have an 88 in a class and have their self-esteem lowered because they feel like they're an A student even though they haven't earned that mathematically in that course. So I think it really comes down to how that individual student defines success and what they're looking for. If they're just looking for an A, then they're going to have to get to the A in order to feel comfortable and confident about that class. If they're looking for knowledge, if they're looking for skill sets, if they're looking for growth, then the number wouldn't be as important. And it could still correlate to positive or negative self-esteem.
How would you change the grading system?
We talk a lot about the standards-based grading system, which most kids are probably familiar with. They may not be familiar with the term, but it's saying like, oh, you have a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1, or whatever kind of system you want to use, where it's, are you meeting the standard? And if you look at like content, standards, and skills that students are supposed to acquire in a subject over the course of the year, it seems like it would work really well to say, these are the skills you're supposed to acquire, and you've met that skill. But if you haven't met it in September, but you meet it in January, then you still met that skill. Mm-hmm. Therefore, your grade maybe should be an A. But what often happens is that you might be tested over a skill in, say, October, and you don't understand that yet, or you maybe can't perform to that level. But in March you can, and you're not given the opportunity to show anyone that. Mm-hmm. So it sometimes seems like not a fair assessment of skills and understanding.
There's some people that believe it should be like a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4 would be like an A. You have a B, C, and then D. We don't have D's, but or maybe you an F would be 0, or maybe you could do a 1, 2, 3, 4. However you want to look at it, because then what you're doing is you're putting equal space numerically in between each of the the letter grades, versus having that huge disparity in F's between a 0 and a 69, which that is humongous. Mm-hmm. So if a student, because then a lot of this goes back to whether zeros are really an appropriate grade to give anybody for an assignment not turned in, because of if you do the math on how hard it is to come back from a few zeros, if you ever had a 0 in your life in a high school class, which I guess it might happen, but if you did, I mean, it's hard to work yourself back. It's a lot of points to lose. It would be harder to dig yourself in a big, huge hole. I still think it would be just as difficult to earn a really high score. I still think that even if you ever went to a system like that, it's still really difficult, because you still have teachers assessing your work, and to earn a 5 would be similar to earning somewhere between 95 and 100 on a 0 to 100 scale. So the 5 would still be really, really hard to get. But I think what it would do is it would kind of keep students from digging huge holes mathematically that you really just can't recover from. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, the argument against that is, well, but they dug that hole themselves. They didn't turn the work in. Then you get into an argument of whether grades, is the grade serving as a punishment? Should grades be punishment, or should they be reflections of what you understand and what you don't? That's another interesting argument with grading. I don't believe grades should be used as punishment. That doesn't necessarily mean I want to move to the system. I'm just saying that there are other, there are people that would argue, educators, not necessarily here in the building, but there are educators that would argue that it's okay to give someone a 0 out of 100 for not turning something in, because you're punishing them for not turning something in. Under our current system, I'm okay with 0 out of 100 because that's really what we have. If you think about it as punishment for the student, then not either of those business to punish students.
The grading system will not fix stress. It will not fix low self-esteem. What you can do is you can change what success is. Success to you and success to me might be completely different. We need to look at longitudinally. We need to look at growth. We need to say this is where a student starts. If a student starts knowing 50% of the content and they end knowing 75% of the content, they grew 25% in the amount of content that they learned. Another student maybe knew 90% of the content when they started and they left knowing 95% of the content. So the original student, that first student, grew 5 times as much as the second student, but the second student is glorified more because they got an A and the first student only got a C.
How can we fix the problem of stress and low self-esteem in students besides changing the grading system?
I feel like we should probably have more conversations with students, not just in the level of the classroom, but at home, maybe with like guidance counselors as well, because I think kids have so much pressure today to do well, and part of the problem is that colleges expect that, and most kids want to go to a university. So there is that pressure, even if the pressure doesn't exist at home or in the classroom. But I think having those conversations with kids and keeping them a bit grounded and reminding them that like this time in your life will pass, and once you're out of college, it really doesn't matter anymore because you're not graded in that way.
Putting more emphasis on the knowledge of a student rather than how they score.
Stress is the #1 factor in academic disruption. 1 in 5 students has felt too stressed to study or be with friends. 1 in 5 have considered dropping out of school because of this.
I don't think stress is a bad thing. I think part of the problem that we have in high school and we have in families, and I have a son who's dealing with some academic stress as well because he wants to be a high achiever, he wants to be successful. We have to stop running away from stress. We have to stop saying stress is bad. Our students are too stressed. Being stressed out, being stressed to the max, which I know you have been at some point, is a good thing because you learn how to manage it, you learn how to cope, you learn how to overcome. If you never learn how to do those things in this really super supportive environment, you're gonna have a really hard time doing it, A, in college when we take the supports away, and B, in life. That's more stressful, that's real stress. And so to ask kids to run away from that or to treat it like they should run away, I think actually creates a detriment when you're talking about self-esteem, you're talking about depression, you're talking about anxiety, like real disorders. I think it actually does a disservice to our students. Now, we maybe need to do a better job of providing supports in our building for students that are stressed, helping them cope. You have some teachers that can help you. They have strategies and techniques, but there's nowhere for you to go. There's no counseling program. There's no group that you can go to. There's no way for you to actually take a look at, here are 10 things I can do to manage my own stress. And maybe the school could provide more supports for that.
I think continuing to have, like tutoring in place for students, but I really think it starts at the younger grades and just, helping kids to learn how to cope, with those kind of challenges, earlier on.
School is an organized chaos. For 7 hours a day, students are required to work towards getting the best grade they can in 6 different classes. There's no denying that it can easily become overwhelming and stressful, causing students to have lower self-esteem, especially when you consider everything that students deal with outside of class as well. Therefore, we ask you to help yourself and each other by talking to guidance counselors if you have any issue whatsoever. Most importantly, ask your school's administration to help students cope with stress in order to raise self-esteem throughout your school. For more information or ideas on some implementations, visit our website.
When the mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out. Wish we could turn